Next up, moving on to a series of monsters that's pretty iconic in the series, we have Tigrex. Tigrex was the flagship for Freedom 2? I know it was on the box art. Yeah, Freedom 2 was the flagship. This particular one is very memorable and has not showed up in every single game recently. It was really nice to see Tigrex show up in Iceborne, sort of retooled for the current gen with a slightly updated design. I like this monster. It's very challenging, and I have a lot of memories of trying to kill this thing in Freedom Unite for the required key quests. I would say the iconic nature and overall interesting design, because I do like the sort of tiger stripes, orange and blue contrast. I'm going to put Tigrex up here at the top of A tier. I'm going to rate it higher than Astalos and these other ones. It's a classic monster. You may or may not like fighting it. I think fighting it's fine. It definitely forces you to be as aggressive if you don't want to get run over and chewed up. But overall, yeah, I think Tigrex is pretty memorable. It's an iconic flagship that deserves to be up on these upper tiers. Next up, we have the deviant for Tigrex that showed up in Generations Ultimate. We have Grimclaw. Grimclaw Tigrex. This one is interesting in that it's more aggressive and has a similar moveset to the regular cousin. But one of the things that Grimclaw has going for it that's a little bit unique is that it can use its claws to create explosions. Basically means it's dangerous no matter where it is on the screen. Between that and its speed, it's pretty mobile and overall pretty dangerous. I do like it's mostly blue coloring as opposed to the mix of blues and oranges for the regular version. And the fight is okay. I remember farming this one a little bit. I'm going to put Grimclaw on B tier. I'm going to put it above Chaotic Gore and Bolt Reaver. It's not as annoying as Bolt Reaver, that's for sure. But I don't think it really warrants putting in the top tier. So we'll put Grimclaw sort of in the middle of B tier. I think as B tier fills out, it'll get pushed a little bit lower, but I don't think it's a bad fight or a bad design. So we'll keep it there. For some reason, the person creating this tier list decided to stick another monster in between the rest of the Tigrexes, so we'll just do them in order here. Next up, we have Gypsarose. Gypsarose is one of the most trolly monsters in the entire series. It's considered a flying type, I think. Oh, it's considered a bird wyvern. Okay, similar family as Cuckoo and Garuga. Gypsarose is kind of silly looking. It's kind of got like a bird theme going on. It's got this crest on its head that it can use to strike against its nose to create a flashbang effect, kind of like Tsitsiyaku in the later games. And it's got this long rubbery tail. Thing about Gypsarose is it's obnoxious to fight, and its design isn't great, but it has one thing that it does that's always amused me in all the games that I've encountered it in, and other people have mentioned it too. When Gypsarose is close to death, when you're fighting it, trying to either kill it or capture it, at some point it'll fall over like it's dead, and it'll go through the exact same animations as it does when it's legitimately killed, and it'll flop over and just lie on the ground. If you go up to it, I believe you have the ability to carve it if you're fast enough, but as soon as you get close, after maybe 1 or 2 seconds, it'll go into this flailing animation that does a ton of damage, and it'll get up to its feet and resume attacking, and it can do that more than once as you're trying to kill it or capture it. As a result, I've seen numerous instances of people who've never encountered Gypsarose go in and think the fight's over, only to get carded when it does its surprise attack, and it's really funny. Because of that, while I don't think its design is great and I don't like fighting it, I don't think I can justifiably put Gypsarose super low on the list. I think I'm going to put it up here by Kezu. Just because of the fact that this monster can control you, makes it stand out in my opinion. Besides that, it doesn't really stick out too much in the design or fight realm, but the fact that it can control you I think is pretty funny. And if a monster can be funny to me, that's going to count for something in this particular tier list. So Gypsarose, you lovable troll, you're going to go up here and see. Its subspecies sucks. We'll get to that one later down here. But now we'll go back to the Tigrex family, which there's a couple more entries here. The first subspecies for Tigrex is Brute Tigrex. This one I have not hunted in Iceborne either. My hunter rank's not high enough to unlock it, but I should be able to hunt it soon. But I have hunted it in older games. And Brute takes the original formula for Tigrex's moveset. It doesn't have a different element for a subspecies, but it does behave a little differently. It's more aggressive, it's got some stomping type attacks, and its roar is more dangerous. It has the ability to do an even more powerful version of the regular Tigrex roar. Overall, I like the fight and I like its design. I think Brute Tigrex is interesting, even though it doesn't have a whole lot different as far as element. I feel like the fight is different enough, and based on what I've seen, people like fighting it in Iceborne too, so I would put it higher than its deviant. I like the sort of brown and dark earth tones palette. It sort of sets it apart from the regular version. So we'll keep Brute Tigrex up here. Next up we have another rare species. This one is unique to the older games, and this is Molten Tigrex. This particular rare species is interesting because it does have a different elemental affinity. Molten Tigrex technically is considered a blast element monster, I believe, and what sets it apart from its regular versions is the fact that it's bigger, for one. It's a much larger target, and as you fight it, it'll sort of move slow. It doesn't start terribly quick, but as it does different attacks, it scatters blast clouds all over the place and can basically create hazards as you're fighting it. But sort of like another variant we'll see later on, Molten Tigrex is like a train that takes a little while to start up. As the fight goes on and you start doing more damage and it starts getting angry and angrier, it'll start speeding up and doing more damage. And by the time you're in the later part of the fight, this thing is all over the place. You fight it in an enclosed arena. I think it's one of the tower stages. So there's no real place to run. And as you fight it, it just gets angrier and angrier. And it becomes basically a death match. I like Molten Tigrex. I think if they brought it back for the later games and sort of updated its moveset, it could be a pretty good endgame challenge. So I'm going to put Molten up here on B tier. I'm going to put it above Brute. It's a shame that the monster hasn't been in any recent games. I think 3U was the last one Molten Tigrex was in. Let's see on the wiki here. Oh, it was introduced in Monster Hunter 4. So it would have been in 4 and 4U. Okay. I haven't played 4U in several years now. Alright, so it's an endgame target from Monster Hunter 4 and 4U. Overall, if you can look up video footage of people fighting Molten Tigrex, it's pretty interesting. It's definitely a wild monster. Alright. Hard to tell how far we are on the tier list, but we're trucking along. Next up, we've got Nargakuga. I've talked about this monster a little bit. Nargakuga was the flagship monster for Freedom Unite, which was the first video game in the Monster Hunter series I played. And right away, I think I've mentioned in the Monster Hunter World Let's Play, I'm putting Narga up here on S tier at the top. This one is my favorite monster in the series. Since Freedom Unite, it's shown up in a lot of games since then. Not all of them, but most of them. When you fight Narga, it's this sort of jet black panther bird-looking wyvern, and it's got a lot of really quick, hard-hitting attacks that force you to sort of watch its tells and patterns. Between its design and its sort of ninja aesthetic, and the fact that its fight's very fast-paced but not annoying, to me, those are the things that cause it to be my favorite on the list. It's very memorable and overall fun to fight. And when I found out it was going to be showing up in Iceborne, I was pretty happy, because seeing the chance to get the monster updated to the current gen with more up-to-date moveset and gear and everything else was great. I like Narga a lot. That's why it's at the top of the list. Now we'll go into the alternate species for Narga, and there's a few. This first one is Lucent? I believe that's Lucent. Alright, my mistake. This particular one's Silverwind. Silverwind Narga is a deviant from Generations. The problem is it looks very similar to Lucent, which is down here. Silverwind is sort of similar to the regular version in that the regular version of Narga doesn't have an element, and actually none of its species have an element. But Silverwind has this sort of stripe pattern on it. It looks a little bit different, and it has the ability to use its tail to create these blades of wind. Overall, it's pretty interesting fight and design. I don't think it's as iconic as the original, but I wouldn't rate it low on the tier list based on that. So let's put Silverwind, I'm going to put it towards the lower part of B tier. Overall, the fight was okay. I do think its patterning looks cool, but I wouldn't necessarily say it pushes up into the A tier range. For the next subspecies, we have Green Nargakuga. This one, to me, suffers from some of the same problems as the other subspecies. These ones down here that basically are palette swaps. Green Nargakuga has slightly different moves, no element, but it doesn't really do much different from the other versions of Narga. Well, I don't want to just trash my favorite monster. I don't think its subspecies is that noteworthy, so we'll put it up here in D tier. Lucent, or I keep calling it Lucent, but Green Narga is really not that interesting to me. Next up, we have Lucent, that I've been talking about before. The Lucent species of Nargakuga is noteworthy in that it can turn invisible. It's a late tier target and has some pretty good gear that most people went after in the older games, and it is decently challenging, but it is a pain to deal with because it constantly jumps around, phasing in and out, so you can't see it. Between that and its fact that it has poison element, its fight is challenging. It's definitely difficult. Its color patterning is sort of whitish, light blue, a bit more bright than the other one. Definitely more so than the standard Narga and Silverwind. Lucent's not bad. I'll put it here on the middle tier. Let's put it behind Tsuchiyaku. I definitely think the fight itself is interesting and its design is interesting. I just don't think it's good enough to be in the above average tier. Some people might disagree with that. Lucent is a cool monster, but I wouldn't say it's near the top of the pile. Next up, we go back to 3rd generation, a monster that debuted in Tri, I believe. We have Giganox. Giganox is a flying type, I believe. Yes, flying type wyvern. And Giganox sort of looks like a distant relative to Kezu. It's got a slightly different body shape, but it looks similar, and then it's got this kind of lamprey-like head and a long tail that also looks like its face, which is confusing. But to me, the Giganox fight is a lot more interesting than Kezu. Its basic element is poison. I think technically it's not a line, although the wiki says it's ice element. It doesn't inflict ice blight, I don't think. It's encountered in the ice tundra environment. But a bunch of Giganox's attacks inflict poison, so I've always considered it a poison monster. Overall, I think it's interesting. It deserves to be higher up than Kezu, I think, because its design is interesting. So I'm going to put regular Giganox on B tier. I would like to see this monster brought back and sort of reimagined for the current generations with an up-to-date moveset. But overall, I think it's noteworthy enough to be in these upper tiers.